Before we get to today's content, I'd like to bring in an event to your awareness. On October 18th and 19th, ACCFS will be hosting their annual marriage conference, Cultivating Connections. This event will be hosted at the Morton Apostolic Christian Church. The event will begin Friday evening and continue all day Saturday. Space is limited, so sign up today. You can sign up at our website at accounseling.org. And now to today's content.
We steward so many areas of our life. We steward our finances. We steward our marriages. We steward what jobs to take, where to live, our children's education. And yet when it comes to something like sexuality, often we kind of hide it, or we don't talk about it, or we languish, or we're ashamed, or we don't know.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Delighted to have you along for yet another episode. Today's topic is going to be stewarding our sexuality, and as guests, I have Arlan and Katie Miller with me. They are a husband and wife pair that do a lot of teaching out of this agency, so welcome.
It's good to be here.
Matt.
Arlan and Katie, we three have spoken on this topic and taught on this topic of sexuality and stewarding your sexuality on a number of occasions. But yet, I think we would all agree that we would not view ourselves as experts on the topic, nor would we necessarily want to be identified as being experts. But there's a needful space here, and we're willing to step into that space.
And I think that's exactly right, Matt. This is a critical area to continue to talk and discuss and to lean into. And it's a wonderful opportunity to share the help and the hope that's available, the idea of purity and sexuality, and how do you navigate it in the world that we live in.
I would say even 3 to 4 years ago, stepping into this space, like you referred to, Matt, has greatly changed my perspective, not just as a female, not my perspective as a believer, my perspective as a parent. And so kind of stepping into this space, educating myself on that, and then, like Arlan mentioned, just providing that hope and that vision, casting a vision regarding the very sensitive topic of sexuality.
Yeah, you mentioned the female perspective, that we're really, among both genders, we're really more alike than we are different.
Absolutely.
Even regarding this topic.
Sure.
And sometimes I think we can maybe separate it so much that we have perhaps some false connotations or conclusions that we make about what the opposite gender deals with.
Absolutely.
But this is an issue that we probably don't have to cite too many metrics to convince our audience that we live in a sexually sensual society.
Right. It's a part of who we are. It's a core piece of who we are, the sexuality aspect of human nature. And there has always been a struggle to live it according to God's design and the beauty of God's design. Now, obviously, in today's age, changes have taken place. There's availability, there's accessibility, there's different aspects that make it even more of a challenge.
Yeah. And even to be more specific about what you're saying is available, you can think about pornography, right, which is in everybody's pocket if they've got a smartphone. This is very available. It's very accessible. It's cheap.
Yep.
Right.
It's cheap, and it's becoming increasingly anonymous too, right? That's the other aspect that without some type of accountability or some type of intentionality, this type of activity can happen in a much more anonymous way than what was possible years ago.
We steward so many areas of our life. We steward our finances. We steward our marriages. We steward what jobs to take, where to live, our children's education. And yet when it comes to something like sexuality and referring back to God's original design, often we kind of hide it, or we don't talk about it.
Or we languish.
Or we're ashamed, or we don't know. And we use a lot of different vocabulary to kind of encapture that. But it does need to be stewarded.
You really raise a nice point there, Katie. What does it look like to engage this area of my life? To be thoughtful about it. And I'm going to touch on those key words that you mentioned about anonymous and availability, Arlan, because I'd like our listeners to consider, maybe perhaps this isn't an issue that they struggle with, okay? But I think we can get empathy pretty quickly for those who languish when we consider, all right, what is it that you struggle with? Imagine that it was affordable, available, and anonymous.
Right.
Pretty soon we can see what kind of a monster it would turn
Absolutely.
into, right?
And I think that's the piece that is really helpful to realize. That word stewarding speaks to the idea that we've been given charge of something. And when given charge of it, we have an opportunity to either kind of stuff it and ignore it and hope it goes away, or we have the opportunity to lean into it, to be intentional, as you said, Katie, and to look for ways to bring the hope of the gospel, the hope of the scriptures into this space as well.
And so really with what you're saying there, Arlan, you're saying God intends for us to steward this.
He does.
He has, and I think you cited early on in the scriptures, I think Genesis 1 says, male and female made he them in his likeness and in his image, right? So we see very, very early that gender and sexuality was built into our frame as he created us. And certainly, yes, he does ask for us to steward this area, this gift. And sometimes it doesn't seem like a gift at all. No. It seems like a curse.
And not only did he create and want us to think about sexuality from his perspective and his design, he also created the boundaries of what sexuality looks like, what healthy sexuality within his framework, within his biblical guidelines, whether singleness or male-female, marriage, that type of relationship. He created that. He also created the boundaries of what healthy sexuality looks like.
I think even seeing God as pro-intimacy, as you just explained him, Katie, is, I think, a very good first step to see that Jesus doesn't blush at the talk of sex.
Right.
He doesn't blush at this concept at all. He would be delighted to pull up a chair and share on this topic. And I think that's very different than what we naturally, that's not exactly what computes in our head.
Yeah. It's an aspect of his design, right? And as an aspect of his design, we need to talk about it and we need to get into it. And I think one thing that can happen with this conversation is we can pigeonhole it into just a certain little bucket, that this is about pornography, or this is about no sex before marriage, or something like that, which are aspects of it. But stewarding sexuality is part of us from birth until death, whether we're married, whether we're single,
whether we're young or we're old.
Absolutely. Yeah. It may look different generation-wise. Recognizing that the age differences, what sexuality, cultural influences are going to be on sexuality is important to realize as well.
Hormones change throughout the course of time.
Absolutely.
As well as needs change throughout the course of time. Right? And so I think, yes, I don't think we ever quite expire from the sexual reality that we live in. I appreciate, too, Arlan, you mentioned pornography is big. That's a lot of what we're talking about, but it's not all that we're talking about, right? The society is sensual in so many ways that is never going to get blocked by our blockers.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's just no way to do it.
Right.
And so, yes, we need to open up ourselves to a larger angle view on what sexual vice might look like. Than being addicted, for example.
Right. And I think realizing that question, am I stewarding my sexuality, that applied to me when I was a single young man trying to live according to God's design. And it applies to me now as a married person trying to live in a God-honoring marriage relationship with my wife. And it applies as I think about my kids and bringing them up into this. That question stays the same. And we have to keep it in front of our mindset.
You talked about bringing up your children. Katie, I'd like to... What should we be thinking about sexual education with our children, right? What are some of those components?
Yeah, a lot of this, when I talk to young parents or parents in general, grandparents even, it's one of those conversations that's really sensitive. It's really hard to have, yet culture is not having a hard time having
Speaking
this
into
conversation.
It. Oh, they're happy
Absolutely
to.
not. Yeah. And so as a parent, I look at it, well, if not me, then who's going to do it?
Right.
And so it gives me that charge that Arlan mentioned. It gives me that responsibility. There's great resources out there about teaching. If you haven't had that conversation or you don't know where to start, there's definitely great resources out there that our agency provides regarding how to teach children, different developmental stages, different vocabulary to use, what's appropriate at what age. Is my child ready to have a conversation about different biological features, boy, girl, that type of thing? And so giving kind of that charge to parents, it's, if not you.
Yeah, then who? No, that's really good. And I really like that concept of, I think sometimes we think that, okay, I had that conversation, whew, that's over with. Right?
Yeah.
One and done. Got it.
And done, right? You're really suggesting or painting a picture of more than that, just by the way that you delineate, okay, you kind of mentioned some levels here.
Yeah.
This is really a longer conversation rather than a one-time, we'll clear this up.
Absolutely. The sexual component at the age of 6 and the knowledge I know at 6 years old should be vastly different than what I know at 18 years old. Am I, as a parent, taking that charge and saying, hey, I need to have these conversations. I can't just read one book. I can't just have one conversation, like you said, and expect the child to comprehend, understand, and carry that through to adulthood.
We are always having a sexual education. I mean, that pretty much is the deal. If we are engaging our world and going out in it, in this sexually sensual society, we are getting a sex education everywhere, right? Whether they are ethos and thoughts and concepts about how I should be viewing the opposite sex, or what
is appropriate touches and not appropriate touches,
or what is sexy and not sexy.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, we're getting schooled in all of this all of the time.
Yeah.
And to say that we're not influenced, to say that the views that I have towards my wife is not being influenced by my surroundings is just really kind of naivety, really, unless I really lean into this space and get informed biblically. Let's now talk about, okay, what would be some of the biblical sexual education pieces? Not only would we share with our children, but we would share with ourselves.
You know, Matt, one piece that I think is really important to consider within the scriptures is that, as a contrast maybe to what you see out there in society, society has done everything it can to divorce sex from the consequences, from the implications of what this physical act is. In fact, that's what they want to define it as. This is just a physical act. It doesn't mean anything else. It's just, it is what it is, right? It just is an expectation. It's a right. It's whatever word you want to put in there. A very counter message to what we see in the scriptures, where God lays it out as a beautiful aspect of marriage where the two become one. And he correlates that in a mysterious way that, as a mystery, it goes. We don't fully understand and won't fully understand, but as a mysterious way that represents Christ and the church, the union of God and his chosen people. It's a beautiful thing to think about that has far-reaching consequences. And that's not the message we hear in the world today.
Sure.
Culture describes it as a self-fulfilling act versus, I would say biblically, it's an honoring, fulfilling act, and how that looks whether single or married.
That binds to in covenant.
Absolutely.
Right, which is a Bible word, really, the covenant that we have with God. So found between a man and a woman, bound in marriage. I think there's a lot, even so, as we talk about, that's the marriage piece, where we see sexuality in marriage, and we see that marriage kind of reflects the gospel to the world. I think another point is towards singleness, right? This is a difficult space. This can be incredibly difficult to process. What do I do with my sexuality when I am single? Is expressing my sexuality in sex the sum total of my sexuality? Does that make sense? And if we think that it is, then we're putting people in an impossible situation.
Right. We're defined by that, right? Yeah. If I cannot express myself sexually, or if I do not express myself sexually in some way, I'm not complete.
Right.
Or I've missed out on some aspect.
And certainly the world is saying that. Right?
Absolutely.
If you are, this, then to be true to yourself, you need to act this way. Well, we have such I think such a refreshing picture in Jesus, right? Who was single, who was male, like us, and always tempted as we are, and yet never expressed himself.
He was celibate.
And was celibate, right? Do we not learn in the example of Jesus that we can be fully healthy sexual beings and never have sex or be celibate?
Fully human sexual beings.
Human,
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And that's a hard space to lean into, and that's a very difficult thing to walk through. But because it is difficult to comprehend and because it's not convenient to lean into, doesn't mean that we should shy away from what the Scriptures represent. That's the piece of good discernment that's necessary and proper.
I appreciate, Arlan, that expression of how difficult it is. And because I think we do need to be real with this topic, that our brothers and sisters in Christ who live out their faith in their obedience to the Word as celibate
Right.
is a tremendous calling and not an easy one.
Right.
And Jesus wonderfully walked that as a tremendous example and inspiration for all of us. But we need to take our cue from him and not from the world, because we're going to get a very different message from the world. Thank you, each one, for being along today. We're going to cut in on our conversation right here. We will pick up next time with part 2 of Stewarding Our Sexuality. Go to our website, accounseling.org, for resources and helps regarding sexuality. We pray that those resources will be helpful, as well as this podcast. Thanks, each one, for being here.